Picture a harsh, unforgiving world, a place where survival is a battle, where only the fittest, the sharpest, and the most adaptable could endure. This was the reality for the Neanderthals, a species that didn't just survive, but thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. One question that still piques the curiosity of scientists: their brain. Neanderthal brains were actually larger than ours, with more volume, greater mass, and a higher energy consumption. So what led to their extinction while we survived? Does having a larger brain guarantee greater intelligence? What if Neanderthals were far more capable than we've ever given them credit for? In this video, we'll delve into a fascinating journey that weaves together archaeology, genetics, climate, and evolution as we unravel a mystery that continues to puzzle experts. Prepare to uncover why the Neanderthals might just have been the true intellectual giants of prehistory. Around 400,000 years ago, in a Europe far removed from what we know today, Neanderthals emerged as a direct answer to a harsh and unforgiving environment. Back then, Europe was a climate battleground. Bitter cold, frost, and long ice ages that stretched across tens of thousands of years. Brief interludes of milder weather were fleeting, quickly overtaken by the return of freezing conditions. Massive glaciers blanketed the northern regions, while the southern parts, like modern-day Spain and Italy, offered no constant refuge either. Summers were short and winters were long, dark, and brutal. Resources were scarce, not a rare occurrence. In this frozen, harsh world of tundras and steppes, where survival was a daily struggle, a unique species rose, shaped by the relentless pressure of evolution, Homo neanderthalensis. To grasp the depth of their adaptation, we must first examine the geological and ecological forces that shaped them. Europe during this time was populated by towering megafauna: woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, enormous bison, and giant deer. It was also a land where formidable predators, such as cave hyenas and massive bears, roamed freely. It was a place abundant in prey but equally filled with danger. Climatic conditions required that the inhabitants move, adapt, and survive by any means necessary. Without modern technology, permanent shelters, or agriculture, these early humans relied solely on their resourcefulness to hunt, stay warm, and create social bonds. This is where the mystery deepens. Surviving in such a harsh environment required more than just brute strength. It demanded vision, planning, communication, teamwork, and a brain capable of all of it. Fossils discovered at sites like Shanidar in Iraq and the El Cedron cave in Spain reveal that the Neanderthal skull was not just large but intricately designed. On average, their brains were about 10% larger than ours. But why? Could their larger brain have been essential for processing such a dynamic and perilous environment? Was it critical for maintaining group unity, ensuring collective survival? Or did that additional brain mass come at a cost they ultimately couldn't afford? The answers are far from straightforward. One thing is certain, though: evolution doesn't create without purpose. Every trait that endures does so because it was beneficial at some point. The Neanderthal brain, larger and more energy demanding, must have provided a crucial advantage. There's no other logical explanation. Beyond the extreme climate, it's important to remember that Neanderthals were nomads, not by choice but out of necessity. They moved constantly to track migrating prey, escape the ice, or find new resources. This required not only physical strength, but exceptional cognitive skills: spatial awareness, navigation, rapid decision-making, and strong social cooperation. Here's where the narrative shifts. Far from the image of the awkward, cave-dwelling Neanderthal, we discover a species finely tuned and deeply adapted to its environment, with a brain capable of tackling the chaotic conditions of Europe during the Ice Ages. Does this mean they were smarter than us? Not exactly. Their intelligence was specialized for a very different world than ours. And that large brain, far from being an evolutionary luxury, was likely the key to their prolonged survival, until changes came that even they couldn't predict. As we'll explore, Neanderthals weren't alone in this harsh world. They shared, and perhaps more, with other human species, some of which were eerily similar to ourselves. While Neanderthals ruled over vast regions of Europe and parts of Western Asia, the planet was far from being solely theirs. other human species still existed. Homo erectus lingered in certain areas of Southeast Asia Homo floresiensis inhabited, what is now Indonesia. And most crucial for this story, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, were beginning to leave Africa. But let's focus on the Neanderthals for now. Despite surviving in such harsh environments, their way of life was far more advanced than once believed. For decades, they were thought to be clumsy, with primitive communication skills incapable of symbolism or abstract thinking. However, archaeological discoveries in the last few decades have completely overturned this view. Evidence now suggests that Neanderthals took care of the injured and elderly, even when they couldn't actively contribute to the group's survival. This indicates not only empathy, but also long-term planning, a complex social structure. They also practiced burial rituals, often placing flowers or tools with the deceased. Was this a form of ritual or simply a health practice? We can't say for certain, but it's clear that Neanderthals thought beyond the present moment. Moreover, we know they used pigments like ochre, likely to decorate their bodies or tools. In caves in Spain, paintings dating back over 60,000 years, long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, appear to have been created by Neanderthals. These actions reflect more than simple survival instincts. They point to a species beginning to develop aesthetic and symbolic thinking. And this is where the size of their brain becomes significant. The average Neanderthal brain was between 1,500 and 1,600 cubic centimeters, larger than the 1,350 cubic centimeters typical of modern Homo sapiens. Why? The reasons are complex, but several intriguing theories exist. One suggests that much of their brain volume was devoted to visual processing and motor control. Living in northern latitudes with less sunlight, they may have needed sharper vision to spot prey or danger. Their bodies were also more robust, muscular, and heavier, which required a larger, more precise neuromuscular network. In other words, a larger brain didn't necessarily indicate more abstract thought, but better physical and sensory coordination. Another theory proposes that the environment demanded exceptional planning and spatial memory. Imagine hunting a mammoth or a bison in a group. It wasn't just about physical strength, it required strategy, communication, and coordination. Neanderthals had to memorize animal migration paths, safe zones, and seasonal water sources. Their brains were optimized for survival, not for contemplating philosophy. However, we shouldn't sell them short. Some researchers believe that while their intelligence was different from ours, Neanderthals may have developed complex forms of language. The hyoid bone, essential for vocalization, has been found to be almost identical to that of modern humans. Moreover, their hearing abilities were comparable to ours. While they didn't leave behind written records or detailed engravings, it's quite plausible they communicated verbally. Perhaps not with the same elaborate syntax we use today, but with enough complexity to convey ideas, emotions, and strategies. Neanderthals also created sophisticated tools. Their Mousterian tool technology displayed advanced stone crafting skills, with tools designed specifically for cutting, drilling, or scraping. These weren't improvised objects. They were functional, tailored to particular needs. All of this points to a crucial insight. Neanderthal intelligence wasn't inferior, it was simply different. They may not have created agricultural societies or written language, but for over 300,000 years, they thrived in their environments. They existed in balance with nature, without overexploiting resources or falling into overpopulation. Their brains were built for that world. But what happened next? As we'll see, their extraordinary adaptations were eventually challenged by a new wave of humans, Homo sapiens, armed with larger social networks, new technologies, and a type of intelligence that would shift the course of history forever. Around 60,000 years ago, something began to shift. Small groups of Homo sapiens, originating from the African savannas, embarked on a migration that, unknowingly, would change the course of history. They crossed vast deserts, mountains, rivers, and dense jungles, eventually reaching Europe, a land already inhabited by Neanderthals. This encounter was inevitable. For years, it was believed that the arrival of Homo sapiens was akin to a conquest, that they, with their supposedly superior intelligence, violently ousted the Neanderthals. However, recent findings have upended this simplistic narrative. There was no great war, no swift extinction. What took place was a long, intricate, and deeply human interaction. Today, we understand that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted for thousands of years. They shared territories, likely exchanged resources and knowledge, and yes, they also interbred. All non-African humans carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This could only have occurred through prolonged and repeated contact. They were not enemies by nature. They were, in a sense, relatives. So why did the Neanderthals vanish? The answer isn't found in one single cause, but rather in a combination of factors. One of the key reasons was the difference in lifestyles. Homo sapiens brought with them a new social structure. Their groups were larger and more interconnected, with extensive networks of cooperation that reached beyond their immediate circles. This allowed for the exchange of resources, ideas, technologies, and better protection during tough times. Additionally, Homo sapiens introduced a crucial innovation: symbolic culture. Cave art, body adornments, and early musical instruments point to a greater capacity for abstraction. This enhanced communication, likely involving more complex language, not only helped convey instructions but also allowed them to share stories, teach, inspire, and motivate. In a rapidly changing world, this made all the difference. While the Neanderthal brain, though larger, specialized in practical survival, navigating terrain, hunting, and immediate needs, the slightly smaller brain of Homo sapiens seemed to have an edge in cognitive flexibility. Less volume, but more adaptability, symbolism, creativity, and imagination. Imagination that enabled the creation of myths, the unification of tribes, and the ability to envision a future. This was crucial because while Neanderthals continued relying on strategies that had served them for millennia, Homo sapiens experimented with new approaches, innovating tools, hunting techniques, and collaborative methods. Then, the climate changed once again. A new ice age advanced. Prey moved or vanished. Fertile lands turned into frozen wastelands. The pressure mounted. Neanderthals, with their smaller groups, limited mobility, and tighter social networks, began to struggle. Recovery from loss became increasingly difficult. A single catastrophe, disease, an extreme frost, a wildfire, could decimate a community, potentially erasing its descendants. Their vulnerability grew. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens thrived. Their larger social networks acted as a safety net. If one group was wiped out, it could join with another. Their culture provided cohesion, and their language facilitated the transfer of ideas. Their adaptability, arguably their most crucial trait, became their greatest strength. This wasn't a contest of intelligence, but of strategy. And in this contest, Homo sapiens prevailed, not by sheer brute force, but by their ability to rapidly adapt, reinvent themselves, and anticipate what lay ahead. However, even in their defeat, the Neanderthals were far from forgotten. Part of them lives on within us. And as we will explore, their disappearance didn't mark an end, but the dawn of a new era in human history. For thousands of years, Neanderthals faced the relentless challenges of a harsh world. They endured ice ages, failed hunts, long winters, and fleeting summers. Born into a hostile environment, they dominated it like no other species. Yet the dramatic climate shift around 60,000 years ago did more than just reshape the landscape. It altered the very conditions of survival. Temperatures began to plummet, and massive ice sheets advanced from the north, blanketing parts of Europe, with a deadly frozen expanse. The once fertile steppes turned into barren deserts, while forests withered into desolate wastelands. Many animals migrated or vanished, and the resources that had once supported entire communities disappeared. For a species like the Neanderthals, adapted to cold climates but dependent on specific territories and prey, this was a catastrophic change. Their diet, while varied, relied heavily on hunting large mammals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and bison. As these animals moved southward or went extinct, the Neanderthals were forced to find new strategies, tools, and hunting techniques. But this shift in resources and tactics proved difficult to manage. The pace of change outstripped their ability to adapt. In contrast, Homo sapiens demonstrated remarkable ecological flexibility. When meat became scarce, they turned to shellfish, roots, or fruits. If a region became inhospitable, they simply migrated. Their adaptability seemed boundless. Their culture was portable, with knowledge passed from one group to the next through language and social connection. Meanwhile, the Neanderthals struggled with their isolation. Their communities were small and scattered, making cultural and genetic exchange difficult. Inbreeding began to take a toll. Hereditary diseases, lower fertility, and a weakened resistance to new pathogens started to emerge. Then came the extreme environmental events. A recent hypothesis suggests that a series of massive volcanic eruptions in Europe might have been one of the final blows to the Neanderthal population. The ash clouds darkened the sky for months, disrupting photosynthesis and further lowering temperatures. This could have triggered a mini ice age, decimating local plant and animal life. The Neanderthals, trapped in a hostile environment, had nowhere to escape. To make matters worse, the arrival of Homo sapiens brought new diseases. Just as the arrival of Europeans to the Americas had devastating effects on indigenous populations, the introduction of viruses and bacteria unfamiliar to the Neanderthals may have led to catastrophic epidemics, further diminishing their numbers. In this grim scenario, each loss was significant. Every disappearing group weakened an already fragile population. While small Neanderthal communities persisted in isolated areas like the Caucasus Mountains or the shores of modern-day Gibraltar, their numbers dwindled with each passing generation. With fewer individuals came less innovation, less cultural exchange, and a diminishing ability to adapt. History is not a straightforward path. As Homo sapiens expanded across Asia and into Australia, the Neanderthal world contracted, slowly fading with each generation. Their decline wasn't caused by a single battle or cataclysmic event. It was the result of a series of interconnected factors that ultimately overwhelmed their resilience. However, this should not be viewed as a failure. Even on the brink of extinction, Neanderthals left a lasting legacy. Their DNA lives on in us. Their tools laid the foundation for our earliest technologies. Their ancient landscapes, hunting grounds, and shelters were later inhabited by our ancestors. The Neanderthals didn't vanish entirely. They transformed and merged with us. In the next part of our exploration, we'll delve into how this blending of species occurred. How, despite their disappearance as a distinct species, Neanderthals continue to shape us, not only through our genetics but also in our memories, our questions, and perhaps in the very essence of what it means to be human. Although Neanderthals officially vanished from the Earth around 40,000 years ago, their presence continues to be felt in ways we never expected. For centuries, their legacy was overshadowed by misconceptions, myths, and bias. They were often depicted as clumsy, brutish, almost animal-like creatures, considered a failed branch of humanity. But the 21st century brought a dramatic shift. With the advent of modern genetics, Neanderthals began to speak again through our own DNA. In 2010, a team of scientists led by Svante Pääbo successfully sequenced the entire Neanderthal genome from fossil remains. The results were groundbreaking. Modern humans outside of Africa carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This revelation meant that the Neanderthal extinction wasn't as absolute as once thought. There had been interbreeding, there were connections, relationships, families formed across species. This discovery confirmed that long ago, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just coexist. They mingled. They loved, they partnered, and they had offspring. And those offspring became part of us. But the Neanderthal inheritance goes beyond just a genetic connection. It extends into aspects of our biology and health, influencing things such as the structure of our skull and nose, our immune system's response to certain diseases, how we metabolize fats or process sugars, our bone density, even aspects of our neurological and psychological traits. Studies have revealed that certain genetic markers passed down from Neanderthals are linked to conditions like insomnia, a tendency for blood clotting, which was advantageous. during their time and heightened sensitivity to pain. Some of these genes also relate to adaptations for cold environments, a trait that was particularly valuable as Homo sapiens moved into northern regions. But the Neanderthal legacy doesn't stop at biology. It also reaches into the cultural realm. Though they didn't leave behind written records, the Neanderthals left tangible traces of their existence: tools, jewelry, pigment remnants, and primitive musical instruments. In caves like El Castillo, Spain, and Bruniquel, France, paintings and stone structures dating back over 170,000 years, created by Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, have been uncovered. This evidence challenges previous assumptions. Neanderthals were not just survivors, they were creators. They had art, symbols, rituals. They buried their dead with personal belongings, suggesting they had an early understanding of death and perhaps even some form of spiritual belief. Were they merely primitive ancestors, or were they the first dreamers? Though they disappeared, Neanderthals didn't leave a void. They planted a seed. Their legacy prompts reflection and humility, reminding us that Homo sapiens were not the only humans on Earth. Other paths existed, different brains, different ways of thinking. Our history is not a single linear progression, but a dense forest of intersecting paths, shared species, alliances, and losses. Today, every time we feel the chill of a mountain breeze, when our immune system fights off an infection, or when we handle a tool with ease, perhaps, just perhaps, we carry a distant echo of the Neanderthals within us. More profoundly, their story serves as a reminder of how fragile our existence is. Adapting to changing conditions is not a luxury, it's essential. Intelligence doesn't always ensure survival, and often the course of our fate is shaped not by strength or skill alone, but by luck, by circumstance, by relationships, and by community. We'll end this journey by reflecting on what Neanderthals can still teach us today, about who we are and how we navigate our own place in the world. Neanderthals were not a failure of evolution, but rather one of its most remarkable achievements: powerful, compassionate, and resilient. They endured ice ages, hunted massive creatures, nurtured the injured, loved and grieved, and eventually vanished. Yet they did not disappear entirely. Their presence lingers in our DNA, in our immune systems, and in the hands that still craft tools. They are with us in the questions we ponder about the past and the future. In today's world, as we face our own challenges, environmental, societal, existential, Neanderthals offer us a quiet but profound reminder: intelligence alone isn't enough. What truly matters is cooperation, adaptability, and connection. We are not the only humans to have walked this planet. We are simply the ones who remain for now. The real question is, will we learn from those who came before us? Or will we become the next relics of a history that moves on without us?